10 facts about Moses that many people don't know. 1. Moses asked God to erase his name from the book of life. The reason behind this statement and what we can learn from it is related to the episode of the worship of the golden calf. The parable of the golden calf reveals human nature and the tendency of people to stray from their commitment to God. Interestingly, while Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 commandments from God, the Israelites were disobeying the first commandment, which forbids the worship of other gods. Impatient with Moses' delay, the people decided to create a new god to worship. To do so, they melted down their gold jewelry and made a golden calf. The people's impatience led them to seek out Aaron, who was given the responsibility of acting as their spiritual leader in place of Moses. Aaron obeyed and turned his gold earrings into a carved calf, which was expressly forbidden. They then indulged in debauchery, worshipping the idol and engaging in immoral behavior, such as eating, drinking, and playing. The Lord then commanded Moses to come down quickly, because the people he had brought out of Egypt had become corrupt. They had strayed from the path God had shown them, creating a golden calf to worship and offering sacrifices to it, saying, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Exodus 32:7-8. When Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets of the law, he met Joshua, and as they approached the people who were celebrating their idolatrous festival, Moses, in an act of righteous anger, broke the tablets as a symbol of what the people had already done. He then returned to God and asked for forgiveness for the sin committed by the people, saying, "Forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of your book." God responded that anyone who sinned against him would be blotted out of his book, but that Moses should lead the people to the place God had promised, and an angel would precede him. Although the people's sin was grave, Moses interceded with a plea for God's mercy, asking for forgiveness on Israel's behalf. If God refused to forgive, Moses offered to be blotted out of God's book in order to redeem the people. Moses believed that Israel's sin was so great that only a human sacrifice could cover it, so he offered himself as a sacrifice. God rejected Moses' request, but this situation anticipated the sacrifice of Jesus, who gave himself for all humanity, offering complete and total atonement. God accepted forgiveness for the nation, but reserved the right to judge each sinner individually. God's promise to remain faithful to Israel and continue with them was reaffirmed with the assurance that his angel would guide them. 2. Moses and the idol of Nehushtan. In the Book of Kings, there is a picture of a serpent coiled around a pole called Nehushtan. This episode is recounted in the Book of Numbers. After the liberation from Egypt, the people began to complain about their living conditions. In response, God sent poisonous serpents that attacked the people, causing many deaths. When the people repented and asked Moses to intercede, God ordered him to make a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. He promised that anyone who looked at the bronze serpent would be healed of the serpent's bites. However, over time, the Israelites began to worship the bronze serpent made by Moses. Hezekiah reformed, but the worship of Nehushtan may have existed long before his reign. According to 2 Kings 18:4, Hezekiah destroyed the high places of pagan worship, tore down the images and memorial stones, and cut down the Aseris. He also destroyed the bronze serpent that Moses had made, because up until that point the Israelites had worshipped it by burning incense to it. This serpent was called Nehushtan, a bronze statue. While it is understandable how an object that had brought miraculous healing could become an idol, it was still a clear violation of God's commandments. The bronze serpent was a divine instruction during the incident described in Numbers, but there is no indication that God intended it to be worshipped on an ongoing basis. Interestingly, the literal translation of Nehushtan is a piece of bronze. It is possible that Hezekiah gave it this name to remind the people that it was just a powerless object, emphasizing that it was God who brought healing, not the bronze serpent. The lesson we can learn from Nehushtan is that even good things and good people can become idols in our lives. All worship, praise, and gratitude should be directed solely to God, regardless of any remarkable story that something or someone has. God wanted to kill Moses in Exodus. The burning bush was the moment when God chose Moses to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and lead them to the Promised Land. Moses is also remembered as the lawgiver and mediator of the Old Covenant. The encounter with God at the burning bush, when God called Moses to be the deliverer of his people, was a crucial milestone in his life. The Lord promised to free the Israelites and lead them to Canaan, a land of abundance. 40 years after fleeing to Midian, Moses returned to Egypt, following God's command, accompanied by his wife and sons, Zipporah, Gershom, and Eleazar. However, before Moses could fulfill his mission, he needed to learn obedience. He had failed to circumcise his son Gershom or Eleazar, possibly due to resistance from Zipporah, Exodus 4:24-26. During a stop along the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. Zipporah then used a sharp stone to circumcise her son and threw the foreskin at Moses' feet, saying, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." After this act, God let him live. Moses' transgression is not clearly explained in Exodus 4:24-26, but the circumstances provide clues. The rite of circumcision, which symbolized the covenant between God and his people, seems to have been neglected by Moses. This may have been due to pressure from Zipporah, who clearly did not agree with the practice. She probably convinced him not to circumcise her son, which explains her anger when she performed the act. She believed that by shedding her son's blood, she would have saved Moses' life. Moses had disobeyed God's command, and this demonstrated the need to work on his own life before assuming his role as spiritual leader. God demands holiness from his representatives, and Moses, even though he was called to deliver the people, still needed to correct areas of his life. God is severe in his judgments, making it clear that he is not a God to be trifled with. In order for Moses to be the deliverer, he needed to correct his own personal mistakes, for God is holy. This judgment applies to the Israelites, for God will not use one unrighteous people to judge another. Moses was unfit to exercise spiritual leadership because of unresolved sin, and this issue needed to be addressed before he could fulfill his mission properly. After Zipporah fulfilled her task, the situation was resolved. God decided that Moses would not enter the Promised Land despite his dedication and leadership. At first glance, the punishment may seem disproportionate to the error committed. The incident of Moses striking the rock in the wilderness in frustration with the Israelites does not seem like a fair reason to prevent him from seeing the Promised Land, especially considering all he had accomplished up until that point, such as leading the Israelites out of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, delivering the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, and winning numerous battles. So why would God allow a single striking of the rock at Meribah to be grounds for such a prohibition? The Israelites, dissatisfied with the lack of water, complained to Moses and tested the Lord. Moses then cried out to God for help, saying that the people were about to stone him. The Lord told him to go ahead and take with him some of the elders of Israel, as well as the staff with which he had struck the Nile. God promised to stand before Moses at the rock at Horeb, and that when he struck the rock, water would flow out for the people to drink. Moses followed God's instructions, and in the presence of the elders, water gushed forth from the rock, quenching the people's thirst. In this episode, the Israelites presented their problem. Moses went up to God, who gave specific instructions, and when he followed them, water gushed forth from the rock. However, the second time the people complained about the lack of water, at Meribah, Moses became frustrated and disobeyed God. In Numbers 20, when the Israelites reached the desert of Zin near Kadesh, they once again complained about not having water. There, Miriam died and was buried, and the people rebelled against Moses and Aaron, saying that they would rather have died with their brothers than be brought into that waterless desert. Moses and Aaron then withdrew from the assembly and fell down in prayer at the entrance to the tabernacle. Then the glory of the Lord appeared, and God commanded Moses to take the staff and, with Aaron, gather the people together, and to speak to the rock in front of them, so that water would come out of it. Moses then took the staff and did as the Lord commanded, gathering the people together before the rock. However, instead of speaking to the rock as God had commanded, Moses, in anger, struck the rock twice with his rod. Water flowed, quenching the thirst of the congregation and the livestock, but the Lord rebuked Moses and Aaron, saying that because they did not believe his word and sanctify him before the people, they would not lead the congregation into the promised land. This incident became known as the Waters of Meribah, where the people contended with the Lord, and he revealed himself as holy among them. God had grown tired of the people's constant rebellion, and Moses, faced with this situation, also became frustrated. Although it seems that God severely punished Moses, it is necessary to understand that the first blow to the rock prefigured Christ, as recorded in 1 Corinthians 10:1-5, which speaks of the Israelites being baptized into Moses and following the cloud, passing through the sea and being sustained by God. All the Israelites passed under the cloud and through the sea, and ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from a spiritual rock that accompanied them, that rock being Christ. However, God was not pleased with most of them, and they were scattered in the wilderness. Moses followed God's instructions to strike the rock in Exodus 17, but disobeyed God by striking the rock instead of speaking to it in Numbers 20. The incident recorded in Numbers 20 was Moses' second striking of the rock, the first being in Exodus 17. As a result, we learn that Moses was punished for striking the rock twice instead of just once, as God had directed. In 1 Corinthians, we understand that the rock in the wilderness represented the Son of God, Jesus Christ. In Exodus 17, the Lord instructed Moses to strike the rock to create an image of Christ as our Redeemer. Christ is our rock and cornerstone, who was struck for our sake, bringing forth living waters, as mentioned in the Psalms and Isaiah. Furthermore, the book of Hebrews states that Christ died only once, and there is no need for further sacrifices for sins. Thus, in Exodus 17, God intended for Moses to strike the rock only once, symbolizing the one-time sacrifice of Jesus that brought salvation. Later, in Numbers 20, God instructed Moses to speak to the rock so that the image of Christ as the rock would be preserved. When Moses chose to strike the rock a second time, it distorted the original image, causing people to mistakenly think that Christ would have to be sacrificed repeatedly to bring salvation. Therefore, God punished Moses to correct this error and ensure that we correctly understand the image of the rock. As a result of this disobedience, Moses was prevented from entering the Promised Land, which showed that salvation could not be achieved by the works of the law, represented by Moses, but only by the work of Jesus, represented by Joshua, whose name is Yeshua, or Jesus. When God instructed Moses to speak to the rock to obtain water, he reacted with anger instead of acting calmly and respectfully. For this reason, he was prohibited from entering the Promised Land. The story of Pharaoh's magicians is told in Exodus 7, when Moses and Aaron confronted Pharaoh in Egypt and demanded the liberation of God's people from slavery. To validate their message, Moses and Aaron performed miracles. Moses stood out for his authority and the miracles he performed, being unmatched in this regard up to that time, as it is said that no other prophet equaled Moses in Israel. Even with the miracles he performed, Moses faced opposition from Pharaoh's magicians. God instructed Moses and Aaron to show Pharaoh a sign of authority when they first met by casting Aaron's staff to the ground. When this happened, the staff turned into a serpent. Pharaoh then called his magicians, who were also able to turn their staffs into serpents. However, Aaron's serpent devoured the magician's serpents, which should have been seen as a threatening sign to Pharaoh's court. Pharaoh then called his magicians, experts in magic and divination, as well as the sorcerers skilled in the arts of witchcraft. These magicians, priests, and diviners from Egypt performed the same feat with their secret arts and enchantments, casting their staffs to the ground, which turned into serpents. However, Aaron's staff devoured their staffs. Despite this sign, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. The magicians were able to reproduce the plagues that Moses and Aaron had brought, beginning with the plague of blood, when they turned the water into blood, just as Moses had done with the Nile River. The Lord instructed Moses to ask Aaron to stretch out his rod over the waters of Egypt, rivers, streams, pools, and other water bodies, so that they would turn into blood. Moses and Aaron obeyed, and when the rod was raised, the water of the Nile turned into blood in full view of Pharaoh and his servants. The fish died, and the water of the Nile became undrinkable, causing the river to emit a great stench. Despite this, The Egyptian magicians used their secret arts to accomplish the same feat, and again Pharaoh's heart hardened, not listening to the Lord. This behavior of the magicians is utter folly, for the plagues were curses sent by God. Instead of trying to reverse the curse, they chose to replicate it, multiplying the problems of the Egyptian people. They were not concerned with alleviating suffering, but in a twisted way were simply trying to demonstrate their power. In the second plague, frogs took over Egypt, and the magicians made matters worse by conjuring up even more frogs. However, after this event, the magicians' authority was limited as they could no longer reproduce the plagues, and they finally admitted that they were witnessing the power of God in the signs performed by Moses. The magicians confessed to Pharaoh that this was the supernatural finger of God, but Pharaoh's heart was still hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Satan had given Pharaoh's magicians the power to replicate some of the signs performed by Moses and Aaron, but although not as powerful as God, Satan, one of God's highest angels, had the power to deceive, imitate miracles, and even predict the future with some accuracy. However, God's power overcame the plans of the Egyptian sorcerers. They were unable to reproduce the plague of lice, which demonstrated the superiority of God's power over the forces of Satan. The ability to perform miracles can be used to demonstrate the supernatural, but not to affirm the truth of something. These magicians were learned and intelligent men, but Paul emphasized that they did not possess the wisdom that comes from God. Many are amazed at any real spiritual power, without considering that this power may have an evil origin rather than a divine one. Even if a new power seems to have the answers we seek, we must not be seduced by it, because demonic forces can disguise themselves as angels of light. God's power is always sufficient to overcome Satan's limitations, and his authority will prevail even in the last days. God remains in control. Moses climbed Mount Nebo while the people of Israel were camping on the plains of Moab. From the top of the mountain, he had a clear view of the entire Promised Land, all the way to the shore of the Western Sea. The Lord showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan, all the region of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, including the Negev and the valley of Jericho, as far as Zoar. Moses stands out for his dedication to God throughout his life, always waiting on God for guidance, as a servant waits for his master. He strove to follow the pattern set by God on the holy mountain. Moses did not neglect his duty. His regard for the name of the Lord was deep, his loyalty to the cause of God was firm, and his faith in the word of the Lord was unwavering. Despite being a servant of God, Moses faced death, as is the fate of all men. Only 2 people in history have been able to depart this world and enter glory without experiencing death, but Moses was not one of them. At the end of his life, God gave him a vision of the land he had left behind when he left Egypt. Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah and saw a vision of Canaan before him. Just like Moses, we will all also experience a moment of encounter with our ancestors, and it is our hope that when we get there, we can go up with the same disposition that Moses did. The manner of Moses' death is impressive, and the circumstances surrounding his death are extraordinary. Mount Pisgah has an elevation of 4,500 feet, almost a mile high. Few men at 120 years of age could climb a mountain of that era and still live to tell the tale, but Moses did. He climbed up without the need for a wide path or any help. This demonstrates his exceptional strength and vigor, as Moses, at nearly 120 years old, climbed a 4,500-foot-high peak without showing any sign of fatigue. He was not lamenting but enjoying his last view of Canaan. Moses had long known that he would die without entering the Promised Land, and he was fully aware of his impending departure. Moses' death, though predictable, reveals God's wisdom and love as well as his grace. After learning that he would die without reaching Canaan, Moses never complained or prayed against this fate. He knew he had fulfilled his mission, which was to guide the people of Israel through the desert. His death came in the best possible company, for he died true to his mission, and though he had no children or lineage to accompany his end, he died in a manner befitting his life. Moses lived 120 years and maintained his health in an extraordinary way. He never needed glasses, crutches, or special care, and his life was marked by vigor and dedication. Verse 6 of Deuteronomy 34 is notable in stating that Moses was buried by God. The Lord buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, and no one knows to this day the exact place of his burial. This was a unique act in the Bible, as God was the one who buried Moses, the only human being who had such an honor. The Lord hid Moses' tomb to prevent it from becoming a place of worship, thus preserving the divine purpose for his death. Today, as you approach Mount Nebo, you will find many establishments such as shrines, popcorn and peanut vendors, as well as tourist tours and even trams that take visitors to the site, with large banners indicating the supposed burial place of Moses. However, the true location was hidden, which was of extreme importance to God, to the point of generating an angelic confrontation. The devil fought over Moses' body, as mentioned in Jude 9, an event not recorded elsewhere in the Bible. The nature of this dispute is not explained, but the verse reveals that the archangel Michael, when confronting Satan over the body of Moses, did not dare to make accusations, limiting himself to saying, "The Lord rebuke you." This episode is unique in Jude and raises the question of how this information was transmitted, perhaps by tradition, although we are not certain of its origin. While we cannot say for sure, it is possible that Satan desired Moses' body to build a sanctuary there. Michael, however, refused to pass any judgment and would instead submit completely to God's authority. This incident illustrates that although Michael is a powerful being, his strength does not prevent him from demonstrating complete submission to the Lord. The hierarchy among angels and their obedience to divine authority is clear, and this reinforces the idea that submission does not diminish a being's value or purpose. Michael's strength was not in question, and his obedience to God only highlights his greatness. The confrontation between Michael and Satan is a necessary evil, something that no one enjoys, but which must occur to correct, purify, and unite the community. An important event that also involves Moses is the transfiguration of Jesus, a significant event mentioned in all four Gospels. After performing miracles and predicting his death, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John to a high mountain, where his appearance changes, becoming radiant, with his face shining like the sun, and his clothes becoming white as light. This moment reflects the real presence of the kingdom of God, with Jesus' identity and mission being profoundly revealed to his disciples. During this transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appear, representing the law and the prophets respectively, and testifying about Jesus, the Messiah. Moses is seen as one of the greatest Jewish leaders, but Jesus is considered even greater, as he is the one who fulfills the law. Elijah, in turn, connects the prophecy of Samuel's day with the prophets who followed, being seen as the forerunner of the Messiah. In Malachi 4:4-6, both the giving of the law by Moses and the sending of Elijah before the day of the Lord are mentioned, reinforcing the connection between these two great Old Testament characters and the coming of Jesus. The presence of Moses and Elijah on the mountain with Jesus symbolizes his majesty and the superiority of Jesus as the Son of God, who transcends them. In the Old Testament, the cloud of God's presence appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai and filled the tabernacle. She also led the Israelites through the wilderness and filled Solomon's temple with the glory of the Lord. By fulfilling both the law and the prophets, Jesus demonstrated his superiority over Moses and Elijah, whose revelations point to him as the incarnate Son of God and the definitive prophet. Thus, the disciples must listen to him in order to understand his messianic mission. When they look around, they see only Jesus, and their attention is now focused solely on him, since Moses and Elijah had the role of preparing the way for the Messiah. Although the disciples had received a clear revelation of Jesus' identity, they still did not fully understand what they had witnessed. Moses, in turn, asked God for his presence to be with the people of Israel throughout their journey to Canaan. In the book of Exodus, chapter 33, Moses asks God who he would send to accompany them. God responds that he knows Moses and that he has found favor with him. Moses then asks God to show him his ways so that he can know God even more and continue to find favor with him. He also emphasizes that Israel's distinction from the other peoples of the earth would come from the fact that God's presence would be with them. Moses and God spoke frankly as friends in a direct dialogue. Although God had promised to send an angel to guide the Israelites, Moses was not content with that, desiring God's direct presence, not just that of an angel. Moses also asked God to teach him his ways, and God granted his request. In Exodus chapter 34, verses 5-7, God reveals his name and nature to Moses, proclaiming that he is merciful, compassionate, slow to anger, abundant in goodness and truth, and able to forgive sins, but also just, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. Moses had experienced extraordinary miracles, such as the burning bush, the defeat of Pharaoh and the parting of the sea, the provision of water from the rock, and the manna from heaven. Even after witnessing these feats, he longed for something deeper, a personal relationship with God. For Moses, knowing God was more valuable than all the blessings and wonders he had already experienced. In the Gospel of John, chapter 17, verse 3, it is explained that eternal life consists of knowing the one true God and Jesus Christ, whom he has sent. God responded to Moses' request by saying that his presence would be with him, highlighting the fact that Moses had found favor with God. However, Moses was not satisfied with this relationship. He wanted to know more about God. Despite having witnessed so many miracles, he longed for a deeper relationship. Moses expressed this desire by saying, "Please teach me your ways so that I may know you." He was like a man hungry for a full meal, not satisfied with small pieces, but desiring to go deeper in the knowledge of God. Moses understood the desire to seek God intensely, as in Psalm 42, which describes the soul that yearns for God, like a deer that searches for water. He knew that knowing God was the true meaning of eternal life, not just a simple act of attending holy places. Moses exemplified intercession and mediation with God, being a great man of faith. However, an even greater mediator than Moses would arise, Jesus Christ, in whom God was also well pleased. Thanks to Christ, Christians can enjoy the same privileges that Moses had, being able to know God in a personal way. Moses, desiring even more than he had already experienced, asked God to show him his glory. He wanted to witness a visible manifestation of the invisible God, a public display of his divine majesty. Moses made this special request, "Now show me your glory." Moses' desire was to go beyond what he already knew and see more clearly the glorious presence of God in his life. This request reflects the deep longing to want more from God, not being content with just moments of worship, but seeking a more intimate revelation of his glory. God's response was marked by his mercy and compassion. He promised to show Moses his goodness and glory, but explained that he could not reveal his entire being, for the direct sight of his face would cause death. God described the way his glory would be shown to Moses, referring to his manifestation through his hand, back, and face. In 1 Timothy, it is mentioned that God, the eternal sovereign, dwells in unapproachable light, something that no human being can see and survive. God fulfilled his promise and revealed his goodness to Moses in a unique way, allowing him to see only a portion of his glory. He proclaimed his name and stated that he would have mercy and compassion on whomever he wanted. But he made it clear that Moses could not see his face, for no one could see the face of God and live. Thus God, in his mercy, allowed Moses to see his glory in a limited but impressive way. God directed Moses to stand in a cleft in the rock, where he would cover him with his hand as his glory passed by. Moses could see God's back but not his face. This gesture by God to limit the view of his glory was a demonstration of his concern for Moses' well-being. Even with this partial revelation, Moses had a transforming encounter with the divine presence, which made his face shine in an extraordinary way. Although the description of God in Scripture is metaphorical, since he, being spirit, does not have a physical body, this partial view of divine glory had a profound impact on Moses. Later, Jesus Christ as the Son of God revealed the true essence of God. He told his disciples that whoever saw him would see the Father, revealing that through Jesus, the presence and nature of God became accessible to humanity.